I'd like to tell the story of George Anderson and his giant thumb. The Andersons, George and Leona, lived just down Sully Road a bit from us. We both had small farms. We both raised, as most people did in that area, enough grass and to make hay to feed their cows with. George, when I was young, was working hard, and he was haying one summer and got his hand caught in the baler, I believe it was, some piece of farm equipment anyway, and almost had his thumb taken off with the machinery. When he pulled his thumb out of the machinery, the baler, I believe it was pretty mashed up. All of the skin and the muscle was gone, all the way down to the base of his thumb. Thankfully, though, the thumb was still there with the bone. Nothing else was there. We wondered what in the world he was going to do. Of course, he was rushed to the hospital, and they tried to save anything they could, but there just wasn't anything left to save. And they were hoping that he didn't have to have his thumb amputated. And that was George's desire also. So what they decided to do was I think it was a news-breaking thing. They decided that they could cut his stomach just on the surface of it and sew his thumb into the tissue, the muscle and the fat that was in his stomach, and that would take a long time, several months, but hopefully it would regenerate enough covering that perhaps he could not have to lose his thumb. And so that's what they did. They sewed his hand up to all of his thumb into his stomach, and so he was handless, of course, for the summer and fall and winter and all of those. It took a long time for them to hope that it was healing as it should. He didn't have infection. He got along okay. He just had to refigure how to do things single-handedly. All of us are so curious, especially we were just children, and I can remember all of us were thinking what it would look like, when it came out. And he knew he wouldn't have joints and skin that would look like it used to, but he was just glad he would have a thumb to try to figure out how to use. So the time came eventually when we heard that George was going to have his thumb taken out of his stomach tissue, which they did in the hospital. And when it came out, it didn't look the same as it always had, but it looked like it was not going to be something we'd have to amputate anyway. They were really grateful for that. It was still bound up outside of his stomach, so he could wear a shirt with his sleeve on again in that arm. But he still had it bandaged. And it was about, probably 6 months later, they finally decided to see what it was doing. And when they took it off, they found that it had indeed put on tissue around the bone. They could give him skin grafts and put skin over the tissue and the fat that was protecting the bone. And so when that was all done, he actually had a thumb. And so all the time after that I was growing up. And he used to joke about it when I was a teenager. He said it was really easy to tell when he was putting on weight because his thumb would get fat. And they said that would be that way probably for the rest of his life, which it was. And didn't operate exactly like a thumb, except they had a stub there that he could use to balance things, to hold things. He was very thankful to still have that with him. The funny part of the story came when we went to the fair one year, and the county fair in Sandpoint, and we ran into George and Leona Anderson. they were there, and our kids had heard the story, the amazing story about George Anderson's thumb that had been sewn in his stomach for a long time, and what had happened. And so, and I told them that he said it was easy for him to tell when he needed to go on a diet because his thumb got fat. And so they thought that was all hilarious. So when we ran into George and Lynn Anderson, who they had never met before, our kids were all, I think, from about 10 years old to, well, maybe not even that old, maybe a little younger. Anyway, to Sarah, who was a mid-teenager. And when I said, oh, that's George and Leona Anderson. And they were excited as I watched them walk down the aisle toward us, and we greeted each other. And I was glad to see George and Leona. I hadn't seen them for a long time. And I looked at the kids, and I should have realized what they would be doing. I said, I'd like you to meet George and Leona Anderson. And all 5 of our kids were not looking up at their faces. All 5 of our kids were studying his hand and looking for the funny thumb that he had sewn into his stomach for a long time. I laughed at that as I watched them do that, and they were curious. They had listened. Anyway, it's one of the fun stories that we remembered and I wanted to share. I also wanted to add before the end of the story that when I was growing up and would look at George's thumb, I thought it sort of looked like a corn dog. And that when my family looked at it as well, they all thought it looked like a corn dog as well. So I guess nothing has changed.